Hi, I'm Sherban, and today I'll show you how to connect your Spring Boot app to a database. The first thing that I would want to discuss would be the concept of externalized configuration. Basically, we need to tell our Java app the URL at which the database is located, also username and a password maybe. And the question is how? Well, the first idea that you could have is to store this stuff in a constant, so in a public static final field in Java, but actually there are better options. What if you're working together with a colleague on the same app and he has a different URL for his database or a different username and password? You need to be able to change this without having to recompile the coding. And to help you in this regard, you can use this concept of externalized configuration. Basically, most web frameworks, at least the bigger ones, have a concept in which you can you can get these values either from some file or from environment variables or from Java options, for example. In our case, we will use a file and it's actually just built into Spring. So let's just jump into it. I'll open the project in IntelliJ and I already have this file. It's under source main resources. It's called the application properties file. So if I open it, it's empty at the beginning, of course, because I didn't write anything yet. And here I'll show you the URL where you can find most of these properties. There is a URL on their documentation website, which I'll just post here, where you can find actually the most common application properties, at least the ones that are built into Spring. Right, and here if you look, you will find a key and some values or some default values. Okay, we want to change the database URL. So we want to set the database URL actually. If you remember from last time, I said we will use H2, which is the embedded database, meaning that we don't even have to set a username and a password. The defaults will just work, which is just a default 2-letter username and no password. But we have to set a URL. So I'll just use the Spring data source URL property. I know it by heart, but if you want, you can search for it actually and you'll find it here. And it says JDBC URL of the database, right? Okay, so it's JDBC, so it will start with JDBC. All URLs start with the protocol. And then I said it's H2 database, it will be H2. And then afterwards, it's database dependent already. So I know that in H2 there are two different options. Either you define in-memory database, which we don't want actually, because that means each time you restart the server, you will lose all the data. So it's not the best idea. So we'll use a file database instead. And then we can specify where to store the file. And I'll just say TMP, so a temporary folder in the current folder, and DB to be the name of the file. Okay, and with this, we can already try it out. So if I run, let me move my face. Good. If I check in the console, I see that it says H2 console is available at /h2 minus console. What does this mean? Well, H2 provides a built-in tool like a MySQL Workbench that you can use to run queries, view the tables, and so on. And it's available at this /h2 console URL. We can copy it and we can go on localhost 8080/h2 console, and it will ask us to log in. We have to check that the URL is the same like we wrote in the application properties file, so it looks good. And as I said, the username and password are the default ones, so we can just connect. And we will see the console. Here on the left-hand side, you can find the tables and the users and so on. We won't look yet there. But here we can run a simple query. Let me try it out. I ran a 1 + 1, and it says it's 2. So it sounds good. Okay, good. let's go back to IntelliJ. So I had the pop-up before which asked me about adding something in Git. So actually it was because the database generated this database file. So this is based on this, because I said the current folder /tmp/db, it created in the current folder a tmp subfolder with a db file in it. I don't want to commit this file, so I will just gitignore it. So I'll say database file, and I'll say everything which is beneath the /tmp folder should be ignored. So IntelliJ knows to not commit this later. Okay, good. The next thing that we want to do is to actually generate a database structure. So we need to understand the concept of database migrations. Basically, you have three different options to instantiate your database structure. The first would be just to go in the H2 console and start writing create table statements. That's a pretty bad idea, because if, for example, I delete the file or if I reinstall everything on my computer or something, I lose everything. So I want to version this script or this mechanism of creating the database structure. The other option would be to use Hibernate or Eclipse Link to generate the database structure from the classes. That's something that I don't really like, because Hibernate is not really smart when it generates database structures. Meaning, for example, if you have a table and you made a small mistake, a small typo in a column name, and you then rename it later, it will actually drop that column and create a new one. So you lose all the data in that column. Because of this, I actually don't really recommend using Hibernate for database schema initialization. Instead, I would suggest writing them by hand. In that way, you're really in control of everything, and it's a lot better, in my opinion. It's maybe a little more effort at the beginning, but I think it really helps you down the line. Maybe at the end I could show you also option to have both of them. So to use Hibernate to generate a kind of basic schema, and then to slightly improve it and then use Flyway to actually run this thing. But let's see, maybe I'll add this later as a small advice. Okay, how does Flyway actually work, which is the third option that I mentioned, to use Flyway, a database migration tool? Well, Flyway actually has the concept of database version. So basically, it's able to maintain the database over a longer period of time and incrementally update it. And that's why I think actually it's the best of all the three options, because you could start with a version 1 database, let's say, and incrementally improve it over time. And this is something that is really done in production, right? Because in production, you can't afford to drop a column which contains productive data. You want to be in control of what happens to your database structure. So I really recommend students and junior developers to start playing with Flyway, because especially for backend developers, it's a tool that for sure you will use in your career. So I think it's impossible for a backend developer which uses a database, a relational database, to not use a database migration tool. Okay, and behind the scenes, Flyway creates a small table. It's called the schema version table, in which it actually stores what file versions you ran or what migration scripts it ran actually in the past. And based on that, it finds out what other scripts it has to run. Basically, it just looks in this table and compares to the available list of scripts and runs just the ones that were not previously already run. Okay, and a small discussion about the relationship types. So there are three big types in my opinion. There is the one-to-one relationship between tables. For example, let's say that you have a customer and he always has just one billing address, but he always has it. So that's a one-to-one mandatory, meaning that there is always this kind of relationship. It could be also one-to-one optional. For example, that you have a customer and maybe he has an entry in the billing address table. Usually for one-to-one relationships, you share the key. So the primary key of the customer is actually the same as the primary key for the billing address. It could be also slightly different, but I generally recommend sharing keys in this case because it's the easiest then to work with the table. Good. Then other option or the other kind of relationship is one-to-many. So one-to-many is used, for example, when you have one customer, but he can place multiple orders, but an order is placed just by one customer at once. So this is really important because that's the one part. How is this modeled? Well, in the relationship, which is many, so of which you could have many more rows, you store a foreign key towards the one relationship, right? In this case, so there is one customer and many orders. Then in the order table, you have to store a primary key to the customers, right? This allows, of course, to have uh, multiple orders for a single customer. It could be an optional relationship. For example, you could have a customer and no orders. This is usually the case. More infrequently, it could also be optional in the other direction. So this foreign key, this customer foreign key could also be null. So then it means that the order was placed by nobody. In this case, maybe it doesn't make that much sense. Okay, and the third type is actually the many-to-many relationship type, in which you have one order could contain multiple products, but the same product could be ordered by as part of multiple different orders, right? So in that case, you need a connection table between them. Why? Well, if you would store the product ID in the order table, this would mean that the order contains only one product, right? Because the order table has a row for each order, and if the product ID is part of that row, it means that you only have one product per order, and that's wrong. And reversely, if you would keep the order foreign key on the product table, it means that each product actually could be part of just one order, and that's also false. So then to get around these constraints or these problems, you would create an intermediate table which contains just the primary keys of both tables. So you'd have this order item, as I called it, table, which has a composite primary key holding both the order and the product IDs. Good. So maybe one last thing. So there is also this many-to-one relationship, but that's just one-to-many reversed. So viewed from the other direction. Okay, good enough talking. Let's create something. So in order to use Flyway, the first thing is that I have to comment out or decomment the dependency I commented last time. So I have to make sure that this Flyway DB, Flyway core dependency is enabled. And then I can create the first database migration file. I'll say it has to be in the db.migration folder. This is automatically created by the Spring Initializer. And the file has to start with v and then a number. So I'll say 1.0, this is the first version. 2 underscores, this is the required syntax from Flyway. And then a name, create feature and topic tables. Okay. Here I can write some create table statements. I'll write create table feature. Have an ID. I usually recommend using primary keys which are auto-generated. So in H2, this is the auto increment column, meaning that each time I insert, this is automatically generated by H2 by incrementing the previous ID that it generated. Okay, good. Then the next one would be the name maybe. So this would be nvar char of 64. He can have 64 characters in his name. Not null. Actually, this would make sense also here to specify. Okay, then I think that's enough. And let's specify the primary key. It's the ID. Okay. Now we want to have a table for all the topics that are taught by this teacher. So I'll create a new table. It's called topic. And it will also have an int. Actually, just copy paste this. And it will also have a name. Here we said that one teacher could teach multiple topics, but a topic for simplicity is just taught by one teacher. So then it's a one-to-many. So as we discussed before, I have to include a teacher ID in the many side, so in the topic side. It is not null, meaning that the topic has to be taught by somebody, and it references. This is a shorthand syntax for foreign key. And I can also write something like this on delete cascade, which says that once I delete the teacher, delete all the topics that he is teaching. Okay, I really recommend using these naming conventions to separate words by underscores. That's really helpful also when you create your Hibernate classes later to have this naming convention. Okay, what else do we have? Well, we will have minimum final score. So the minimum score that you need to pass to be a decimal, say 5, 2. So 5 places and 2 after the decimal point. Minimum 10 sentences. This will be int. And then the final score formula, this will be n varchar, I guess, so just a string, but it should be bigger a little. Lastly, we'll have a primary key, is ID. Okay, let's see if it works. So I'll rerun, and hopefully Flyway will not crash. Okay, it worked. Let's see what we actually got here. So in the terminal, you will see that actually Flyway started. It said, okay, I use this database. It recommended me to update. Yeah, I just used the default, so I don't care about that right now. And it checked, okay, we have one migration. There is no, this is empty schema, so it created a schema history table. And then it migrated the first migration. So it ran the first migration. Okay, good. Good. Let's check if we look on the H2 console. I'll refresh. So I'll reconnect. And I can already see the teacher, the topic, and the Flyway schema history, right? I can run this select. If I just click on the name, I get the select. It's nothing in the table. Okay, good. What I would want to show you is how to actually set up Flyway such that it works when you develop, or works a little better when you do the development, and to also insert some mock data in the database. Okay, so let's say that I made a mistake and I want to change this file, right? I don't know, I maybe want to rename the column so it's like teacher ID, right? I don't recommend this necessarily, but let's say that I want to do it. If I would restart the app, what will happen is that the app will crash. Yes. Why? Well, Flyway checks if you did not actually change the file after it was run. Why? Well, because if you do a change and the file was already run, then the changes that you made will not arrive on the database if it just ignores this and does not run the file again. So you have normally in production, what you would do, you would go on the database and actually manually adjust what you changed or create a separate migrations. For example, in this case, I would have done an alter table rename column, but I don't want that. At least when I'm developing locally, it slows me down. So then I can check here to see, do a small hack. So I can enable this property. And what would this do? When it sees, or when Flyway sees that, okay, I changed something in my database structure, then it would drop the database and it would recreate it. Well, now I have a different problem that I did not rename it here as well. So run it again. I will revert this anyway because I don't like this thing. Yeah, also here. So incrementalism at its best. So once you rename the ID, of course, you have to rename it also in the primary key spec and also in the foreign key spec. So now it worked, right? And if I check right now, I connect, the teacher has a teacher ID now, right? Okay, I'll undo this because actually it doesn't make that much sense. And if I restart, it should be back as it was before. So again, this is just for local development. For sure, in production, you disable this, right? Okay, let's check. I connect and the teacher has ID. Perfect. Okay, the next tool that I recommend for generating mock data would be mockaroo. This is a random data generator and we can use it to generate some data for us. So ID is ID, name. This would be a full name. So these are the teachers actually. Okay, and I can say, okay, generate for me a SQL, a set of SQL statements into the teacher table. I can preview and I can just copy, I don't know, let's copy 25 rows. Good. And I would not want to mix the migrations with the mock data because probably in the real life scenario, I want to disable the mock data. So then I will create a new directory for the mock data. And well, actually, there's a problem here with IntelliJ somehow because I would want this mock folder to be inside the DB subfolder. So I had to create it from outside. Okay, so I have a DB and here I have two subfolders, migration and mock. And I will just add into the mock subfolder migration, which would be the last migration that is ran. So I use this 9.9 just to have a very large version number such that it's run at the end. Okay, and I insert like this. And let me also create some topics. So it will have an ID, to have a teacher ID, which should be a number with 0 decimals between 1 and no, between 0 and 25. Right, I guess 25 was the last one. Yeah. Okay, then let's see what else you have here. We had the name. So this for what fits, let's say product. Maybe let's use the fake app name. Okay, then minimum final score. This should be a number. So a number between 2 and 10 with 2 decimals. Then we will do the minimum attendances. This will be also a number actually between 5 and 14 with 0 decimals. And the final score formula, well, right now we don't know how this will look like. So use, I'm not sure, a phrase for now. Phrase, and then later we will change this. Okay, and again, the table will be named topic. Let's preview it. Okay, so this would be the SQL. And again, let's just copy the first few 25 rows. I think that's enough. And insert it in here. Okay, good. And now we have to do a small other config to get this to be ran. Basically, Flyway will ignore this folder because it just looks in the DB migration, and we have to slightly enhance the Flyway config. I can just look here. So Flyway locations. Let me also copy the default value. So I can just enter here, comma separated. Oh, CL, and here to say mock. And then it will run the scripts from both locations. It will order them by the version number regardless of the folder in which they are located. Okay, let's see if it works. It seems to have worked. And the last thing that I want to do is to check if this data was really, if it was really inserted. Yes, looks like it, right? So we have 26 or 25 rows in here, and in the topic, let's check, we also have these rows. We were a little lucky because I just noticed that the ID starts from 1, but we put a 0 in the teacher ID. Normally, if any of these would have been 0, we would have gotten an error, right? So let's just check that. So if we put in the teacher ID 0, right, because of the foreign key, it should give an error that you can't insert or you can't reference a non-existing row. Right, exactly. And the error would be referential integrity constraint violation. Right, so if I undo and I run it, it should work. Good. So it works. So that was all for today. Next time we will write some repositories which are able to read the data from the tables that we created and just populate it. Thanks, and see you next time.